It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come.
It's the day after Liberation Day, where President Donald Trump has launched a global trade war across the world, announcing that the US is levying tariffs on every country. So what does this mean for the Caribbean? Well, surprisingly, the Caribbean has been spared the worst of it. Because while some countries like China are facing over 54% in tariffs, and the EU and Japan are steering down rates of 20 to 24%, most Caribbean nations have only been hit with a 10% tariff on their exports into the United States, except for Guyana, who unfortunately received a tariff for 38%. Now, at first glance, that might not sound like such a bad idea. We might even think, well, at least we're not being hammered like the others. But hold on, this isn't just about the percentage. The bigger picture here is how these tariffs actually work and who actually pays for them. Now, let's break it down. So when a product is imported into the United States, let's say a tin of corned beef from Grace Kennedy in Jamaica, or a packet of banana chips from Sunshine Snacks in Trinidad and Tobago, the US government slaps on a tariff at the border. Now, that tariff is not paid by Grace Kennedy or Sunshine Snacks. It's not the Jamaican or Trinidadian government paying it either. It's paid by the American importer, usually a distributor or a supermarket chain, who then passes that cost on to the American consumer. And that's the tricky thing about tariffs. They're often sold to the public as punishment on foreign countries. We're going to make them pay. But in reality, it's a local consumer who gets hit in the wallet. And this is where it gets really interesting. From the US government's perspective, the goal of these tariffs is to reduce imports. They want Americans to buy American. If everything from abroad is more expensive, the theory goes consumers will switch to American-made products. But this is in fact the problem. A lot of goods are imported in the first place because they're cheaper than the US-made versions. So even if consumers stop buying Chinese electronics or Caribbean-made snacks and instead choose American alternatives, the price of those American-made goods is usually higher. So prices will still go up. So even if the US achieves its goal by reducing imports, Americans will still be paying more at the checkout. Not because of the tariff, but because the local alternative costs more to make. So whether Americans continue buying imported products and pay the tariff or switch to local options, the outcome is the same, higher prices. And that's where inflation starts creeping in. People are paying more for the same things they used to buy last week. And if wages are not rising fast enough to keep up, people start to feel a lot poorer. Now, you might be wondering, how does this affect the Caribbean? Well, in two very big ways: tourism and remittances. Now, let's start with tourism. The United States is the single biggest source of tourists to the Caribbean. Millions of Americans flock to Jamaica, the Bahamas, St. Lucia, and Barbados and beyond every year. Tourism is our lifeblood. It creates jobs, it supports small businesses, it drives foreign exchange. But if cost of living in the United States goes up, if groceries, gas, and basic services gets more expensive, Americans will start to cut back. And one of the first things to go is going to be travel. The fact is, a trip to Montego Bay or a luxury resort in St. Kitts will start to feel like it's a luxury they just can't afford anymore. So fewer tourists will show up, hotel bookings will drop, restaurants will see fewer customers, tour guides, taxi drivers, craft vendors, they will all feel the pinch. That's the ripple effect of higher inflation caused by tariffs. Now, this is why the Caribbean needs to broaden its tourism market beyond just the United States. We can't keep putting all our eggs in the same basket. And thankfully, some cracks of opportunity are already showing. Case in point, Emirates Airline has just launched a new codeshare route from Dubai to Jamaica via Germany in partnership with Condor Airlines. Now, this is obviously massive. It opens a door for tourists from the Middle East, Asia, and continental Europe to access Jamaica much more easily. That's the kind of move the entire region needs to be making, diversifying our visitors, promoting Caribbean tourism in non-traditional markets, and building a global brand that goes beyond sun, sand, and the United States East Coast. Now let's talk remittances. Many Caribbean families rely heavily on money sent back from loved ones living in the United States. So whether it's helping out with school fees, groceries, or a little extra for building a home, those transfers play a massive role in household stability across the region. But if your cousin in Brooklyn is now paying more for food, electricity, and rent and facing higher credit card bills because of rising interest rates, guess what? They're going to be sending less money to you back home. And that affects everything from how people eat to how kids stay in school. But here is the uncomfortable truth. This dependency needs to end. Remittances have become the crutch for many Caribbean economies, but governments shouldn't be building national strategies that depend on money sent from abroad. That is just not sustainable. Instead, Caribbean leaders must focus on growing local industries, creating jobs, and investing in education and entrepreneurship so that people can earn a good living at home in the Caribbean and not just survive because a relative in New York or Miami is sending money every month. We should not be managing poverty, we should be building prosperity. Let's circle back to Caribbean companies like Grace Kennedy and Sunshine Snacks, because these businesses have built solid export operations to the United States over decades. They cater to not just to the Caribbean diaspora, but increasingly to curious Americans who are exploring new cuisines. Caribbean brands have been breaking into Whole Foods, Walmart, Amazon, you name it. But now, every product they send to the United States has a 10% tax slapped onto it. Their products suddenly become less competitive because American importers might start to look for cheaper options from some countries that somehow manage to negotiate better trade deals with the United States, or they find a local supplier. Distributors might even say to these companies, hey, you're going to need to cut your price to stay competitive. We can't afford to eat that 10%. Now that is going to put pressure back on Caribbean manufacturers. Do they need to reduce their margins? Do they need to eat some of the cost? Or do they risk being dropped? This is going to be a challenge, and even if 10% sounds minor, over time that will add up, especially when margins are already thin and competition is fierce. So what should the Caribbean do? I want to hear from you in the comments, but here are a few ideas. Some of them are long overdue. The Caribbean needs to broaden its tourism market beyond just the United States. Every single country in the region needs a clear strategy to tap into Europe, Latin America, Africa, and Asia for visitors. We need to break the dependency on remittances, focus on building strong domestic economies, invest in local entrepreneurship, create better education to employment pipelines, and promote sectors like technology, manufacturing, and creative industries. The goal is to have jobs at home and not dollars from abroad. Companies will also need to explore new regions like Latin America, the EU, Africa. The Caribbean products have global appeal, but we need trade offices, diplomatic support, and branding strategies to break into new markets. And finally, we need to make CARICOM work. It's honestly crazy that it's been a lot easier for us to trade with the United States than for us to trade with Caribbean neighbors. We need to remove all trade barriers and tariffs from within CARICOM. Full stop. Let's finally create that Caribbean single market we've been talking about for decades. Now look, within a global trade war, small economies like those in the Caribbean are just tiny boats in a stormy ocean. We might not be the target, but we definitely feel the waves of it. Silver lining is this: we've been here before. We've faced economic shocks before, from political chaos, hurricane, the pandemic, and every time we found ways to adapt, innovate, and to survive. Look, I want to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts. The world might be entering a more protectionist and a more unpredictable era. How do you think the Caribbean will be able to weather this storm? Look, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so that I can keep making more videos like this. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.